I've done, and I do a lot of educating about honeybees and everything, and what happened recently is Ken said, hey Fred, would you stick around a little bit after the bee meeting and talk to a couple of people that might be interested in how to winterize their hives, because we have some new stuff that I'm trying this year. And this will apply, by the way, we use that term winterize your hives. This applies year round. This isn't just winter. This can also need protection from summer heat, right? So, and wow, the phone is too loud. But this is interesting. I'm trying something this year for the first time. I don't know if you're familiar with something called double bubble. How many already knew about this? Okay, so you're the no. I wasn't. Someone had this put underneath their concrete slab on a sub-floor heating system, and then they said this gives them an R13. And I thought, sandwich between concrete and gravel? No, there's no way. And that turned out to be true, unfortunately, after they did the work. So it led me on a quest to find out, can this actually give an R13? And apparently, it can when there's an air space between them. Okay, so there's a difference. And so I decided to apply this to beekeeping, because I'm constantly thinking about beekeeping and how to insulate better. For those of you who may not know, I have horizontal hives as well, and I have something called the Delayance hive. It's a French hive design, it's a horizontal format, and the backs of the frames come together so tight that there is no space for the bees to travel between them. So there's also, they want you to lay a blanket over the top of that. So a lot of people use quilt boxes and things like that. Some people have top venting in winter to get that moist, humid air out so it doesn't condensate inside the hive and drip down on your bees. But Dr. Seeley and other researchers at Cornell University have figured out that even with the Langstroth boxes, they're only 3/4 of an inch thick. If we remove top venting, if we have no upper entrance, and if we insulate that hive top, if nothing else gets insulated, your hive top should. And what that does is prevents the dew point from occurring over your cluster of bees. So everything that I'm talking to you about right now is related to that principle. We don't want condensation to form over your bee cluster, which would drip down on them in wintertime when we get to, especially when we get these fluctuations in temperature. And then of course it dampens the bees, and anything that gets damp, that's fluffy, loses its insulating properties, and your bees are insulated by bees. So if they get wet, they lose their insulation, they die. And Dr. Seeley made these terrific observations, and I think it's pretty well understood, that honeybees in wintertime need water. They need water to process the honey that's stored, because the sugar content is so high that if condensation does form on the interior side walls of your hive, at the cluster and generally below it, those bees, the older bees in particular, move out from the mantle of the cluster, collect that moisture from the sidewalls, and they migrate that into the bees that are generating the warmth that continues to maintain brood through winter. So it's a very important thing that has to happen. So we really don't want to get rid of all the moisture from your hive in winter, and we don't want to bleed off the secondary warmth that they've accumulated underneath the cover in your hive. So when you have upper vents in winter, there's a continuous flow of air through the hive, whether the bees want it or not. And the only way that they can stop or control that is by clustering bee bodies on the interior up against those vents that we put in, and also at the entrance to slow it. And a very good example is if you've got a multi-story house, and in the wintertime, if all your windows and doors are closed, but you just open the front door, there's not a sudden blast of air through your whole house. But yet you open an upper window the slightest bit, and all of a sudden, there's an effective airflow through the house, and it bleeds off the resources and causes you to generate more heat to keep up. So that's what the bees do in a vented hive. They use more resources. They use their thorax muscles to generate warmth, to keep that cluster warm, because that's what they're doing. You'll hear this often where people say, they're not trying to heat the hive, they're just heating themselves, and that's true. But just by occupying the hive, they're respirating and they're increasing temperature in the hive, and therefore it rises, and we want to trap that. So everything I'm doing here really ties into that. This is a really well-crafted piece of insulation that comes from Home Depot or wherever. This is R10, it's rigid foam board insulation. And all the way in the back, I want you to look at Greg, who's shaking his head no, because he's very modest. But he built these for me. He didn't build this one, I have to say that, because this is badly made. But this is for my nucleus hives, my resource hives. So I have 5 frame nucleus hives that are in the wooden boxes, and those are just 3/4 of an inch thick, and I do not feed them. Even when it's a swarm that I put in there, I don't feed them, I don't take them off, I don't do anything else. They have the migratory covers on them. And then just by creating a cap on the nucleus hive, they all came through winter last year. So once again, the lower portions are standard 3/4 of an inch. The boxes, the bottoms are integrated bottom boards with just a 3/4 inch entrance, and then they've got that control wheel on the front. So I cut that to half the diameter of that circle. And that's the configuration all year round. Because likewise, in the summertime, when that midday sun is beating down on it, the insulation on top of your hive will prevent that from migrating in, and then from your bees using up their carbohydrates in order to fan and cool the hive. So they're using a lot of honey in summer as well. We think of that as a winter resource. They need those carbs, and that they dry out or keep themselves warm in winter, which is true, but in summertime, they equally go through a lot of honey. That's why we get this. Those of you who have scales on your hives, you'll get a nectar flow. The weight will gain suddenly, only to have it all go away within 2 or 3 days after that. But then if you look, we had a lot of heat, and the bees were cooling and using the resources to do that. So nucleus hive, this is my cap. Thank you, Greg. That's my version of it. The first thing Greg asked me when I brought this in, he goes, did it fit? Okay, no, it didn't. My dimensions were off. So I wasted all my time. Now let's go to Langstroth, which is the most popular hive ever. Ever since Dr. Lorenzo Langstroth, Reverend, retired, did his research. He went to a school called Harvard. He knew some things about bees. So that's why we're all stuck with Langstroth hives right now, but I'm going to talk to you about how I've configured all of my Langstroth hives for winter. So instead of the standard inner cover, which I don't even have here, but most of you are familiar with, your inner cover is a standard 3/4 inch thick trimmed board. It's usually got a sheet of Luan through it, and then there's a little oval entrance in the middle. And the reason that little opening is oval is that used to be your bee escape. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but there's a little plastic bee escape that clipped in there, so it was ready on your hive. So when you came to harvest your honey, you took the inner cover off, and you lifted your super, put that inner cover under it, put it back down, and now your bees escape through that hole. That's really what that was for.
Wow.
Later, people use it as a feeder hole. Okay, so I've done away with them all. And there's an insulated inner cover. This is yours, by the way. So, Charlie was unaware. They're made by Bee Smart Designs. It has a hard plastic. How many of you have seen one of these before already? Well, why am I even here? Anyway, the underside of this has a little arc to it. So if condensation formed under it, it would then drip along the sides and then down the sidewall. This is designed for a 10-frame box, but they also fit 8-frame standard Langstroth boxes. And when you set it on the top, these have little taps on them. I've started chiseling those off of all of these. Just because when you put these on and you strap down your covers, the bees purplize that and it seals on anyway. These have a cap in the middle. This is your feeder hole. And so this cap comes off, which I probably can't pull it off right now because my fingernails are not so strong. Let's pretend that the cap is off. And then what I started doing last year is I started putting fondant on these. A lot of people use dry sugar. You can put a wrap around on it. You can use the mountain camp method, which is dry sugar over a piece of paper and the bees chew into it. Condensation that forms up in this space, and there will be condensation up here once they get up here, depending on how your hive is configured. But that condensation also turns your dry sugar, which is loose, into a sugar brick. And the bees will continue to use it. So there's no reason if you're putting dry sugar in this upper portion to feed your bees, to give them an emergency carbohydrate source, no reason for you to wet that in advance. It'll do it on its own, it'll become solid. And you can also check it easily to see if the bees are using it. So I take these fondant packs, I cut a circle in the bottom here, lay it right over this hole, and then in the wintertime, I put a feeder shim around it, so it'd be cool if I had a feeder shim to show you. Oh, look what just happened. So this feeder shim, as you might be able to tell, is just an old box, an old tin frame, so rather than throw away your old tin frame box, cut them up and turn them into feeder shim spacers so you can put food on for wintertime. This accommodates a rabbit round, which is 3 inches tall. And then, so the other thing is there are gaps around this. So what I'm going to do this year, so I can't say I did it last year, it just makes sense to me. I'll have pieces of double bubble, and I'm going to use large ones. And I'll just pack that in over the top here, and I'll just tuck it in around it to create that airspace, but also it means now that outside cold air is not going to make it to the fondant. All right, so then when I go to inspect it, I'll pull that out in wintertime. I can look to see if the fondant pack is consumed. Last year, none of the hives used all of the fondant. So I was able to look at it, see what the progress is in consuming that. Remember, it's an emergency resource, not primary. We're leaving about 50 pounds of honey on for wintertime. And most of, even the hungriest colony used about 2/3 of it. So they do move freely through this packet, and they go all in there, and they will clean it out completely if you leave it on, even in spring, just so they can use it up on rainy days and things like that, which they did. So that was interesting. The company that makes this, did you have a question?
When did you put that on initially?
Last year?
Yes.
November.
No, okay,
Yeah.
this time of the year coming up.
Yeah. Actually, this week I'll be putting them on all the hives. So that's on, and I've also taken to sealing these feeder shim pieces of wood on with expansion foam. And then I make sure the side walls are also insulated, and then the cover. So I also took off my standard covers in the past. These are made by BEEKS. They're designed to go with the BEEKS hives, which are polystyrene. But I was putting these on instead of the standard telescoping lid. And that's because now I have a second layer of protection against winter cold or summer heat. These do have to be painted because they're not UV stable, right? But a lot of people have equipment already, the telescoping cover. So this is your standard telescoping lid, most of you are familiar with, 3/4 inch pine usually around the outside, that's an R.7. Then when it comes to the top though, which is metal, this is what we've used for forever, right on top of your inner cover. And I don't know if you've ever shot thermals of these in the summertime, but it's not unusual for this to be 130 degrees in midday sun. So there again, your bees can control the climate inside the hive so long as they have access to fresh water. Because the water bees come in, they paint that over the surface of the brood and everything else. And the brood is the most critical temperature control area in your hive, 94 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Year-round, whenever brood is present. So we can do something about this too. If you have bees, you can take this and staple it in here. And then put this on. It's not necessary to insulate the sidewalls, but if you staple this to the surface, to the luan or whatever it's made of, and then put that over your feeder shim, which is on top of your inner cover. If you don't have a feeder shim, then this will benefit you if you put it on the inner cover too, because it's equal to adding another, a 1-inch thick piece of pine, actually. So Reflectex, or whatever they want to call it, will keep, of course, the heat out and in summer, and then the heat in winter. So it's a very simple thing, and they're sold in all the building centers. There's, you want to look for the ones that have bubbles in between them, because there are some foil-based insulation papers or barriers, like vapor barriers, and this looks like single bubble, there's double bubble. So 2 is better than 1, in my opinion. Now the other thing is, we call it the Way to Bee Academy building on our property. It's a shed with bees in it, but it sounds better if you call it an academy. But I looked at Harvey's roast beef sandwiches and how they're all wrapped in foil. I didn't really, it just made a good. All the ceiling is covered in double bubble now. And there's a row of windows, eyebrow windows, you know, they're up in the roof that face south. And when it's 58 degrees outside, it's 82 inside that building, just from the south-facing windows. So the principle is good for people as well as your bees, which I thought was a very extraordinary tie-in on my part. So that's what I'm doing. Insulating the inner cover is the most important part. You cannot or should not just get rigid foam board and put that in place of your inner cover, because what happens is the bees think that that's pulpy wood and they start to excavate it, and they'll also propolis it. And so, for example, if we had that inner cover with a hole in it and just put these on, I've had bees chew right through it, and halfway through winter there's a little hole right here, and they're actually starting to poke their heads out, and then they panic and fill it with propolis, which is very difficult when the weather's cold. So when we do late season configuration modifications of our beehives, it's a challenge to the bees, because their opportunity to seal it and modify it to suit themselves has passed. It's too cold. So we have a tendency, that's why I think it's better, set up your configuration and maintain that configuration summer, winter, year round, because the bees tend to do better. Are there any questions?
Fred, how much airspace do you need between the double bubble?
Between the double, there's a very good website that shows how to do that, but it's designed to go on a 2x4 stud. So 3.5 inches gave you an R13.
Okay.
And the more airspace you trap, apparently, that it compounds the R value. So, which is very interesting. But yeah, the more air gap you can provide and have a complete seal of double bubble, if there's leaks in it, of course, that helps defeat that barrier. So if you can seal it up, plus there's aluminized tape that you can put in that closes up all the joints. As long as the air doesn't flow through there, it's very effective.
So no venting at all at top?
No, I don't vent at all, right?
You're using a single hive box?
We use 2 boxes, so we have a deep and then a medium, and in some cases double deeps, and those are usually the 8 frames. And so that's when we pack down for fall, that's the configuration. And I'm glad you asked that, because if you have a hive where you've decided to leave a whole bunch of honey on because it seems beneficial to the bees, and then you want to harvest in spring, so let's say you have a deep box and 3 supers on it full of honey, if the bees are not big enough in number to occupy that space, you're going to have condensation on your honey frames above the bees. So you definitely want to pack down your hive to a manageable size space. That's why Dr. Seeley specifies a single deep and a medium. Double deeps, if you've got a really large colony of bees, then you've got about 70 pounds of honey on for winter, which, by the way, last year with the insulated inner covers on, they used 30% of the honey that they normally use in winter, and we had a high survival rate.
Mm.
So, great question.
So would you advise doing the winterization or now, because it's a little bit warm and they can seal things up with a propolis versus putting it off to December?
Put it off to December to do what?
Well, if you're starting from scratch and don't have this already set up, like
Yeah, if you're not set up and you want to modify your hives right now, we have a week coming up where we're going to have temps in the 70s. This is your window. Now through Wednesday, I believe. So if you haven't done it, you want to make changes, this is kind of your window of opportunity. Although, if you're not insulated and you're worried about disrupting the propolis seal, I would consider adding the insulation an advantage in excess of damaging the propolis seal. So I'd rather see you break your seals and insulate than to just kind of, oh, it's too late, I don't want to do it. So I hope that makes sense. Other questions?
Is that, I'm weird, Fred. Where do you get those plastic inner covers?
This one right here?
Right.
That insulated inner cover comes from Better Bee. A lot of companies sell it, but BetterBee.com sells them. It is called the Bee Smart Insulated Inner Cover.
From a distance, I didn't realize that was styrofoam.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you want to seal this circumference.
Figure out how to do that.
Well, I need to talk to you after, since no one can hear us right now. I can figure out what these for this
Fred?
current.
Fred, where do you get the Hive Alive?
Hive Alive, this comes from Ireland. by the way, for those of you who don't know, it's a seaweed extract. It's the same company that makes the Hive Alive liquid that we mix into sugar syrup after all of your supers have been taken off. And it's proven effective in the reduction of Nozema spores in the midgut of your bees in wintertime, which of course Nozema rises as you head towards spring. That's why you end up with a lot of digestive disease for bees that can't make cleansing flights. So it's the same company, and there's a link on my webpage. For those of you who don't know, it's thewaytobee.org, and you can also just Google it. I Alive fondant. So the company sells it too. These packs are 2.5 pounds each, and they go for under $5.
Did it last you the whole season last year?
These lasted me the whole season, but of course these came out last year. I don't think I put them on until November. And I marked with a grease pencil on the back of each hive because I did comparisons. So 50% of 20 hives, so we had them on 10 laying straw hives last year. And those that had this did better than those who just had sugar. And that's not a very good statistical, number. If I had 200 or 300 hives, we could make a better assessment. But Hive Alive is one of the companies that has had a scientific review that proved that it was effective on Nozema, for example.
So when you cut the square, do you take the square off or do you fold it back in?
You cut a little circle.
Circle.
I say cut a circle. Now the people that invented it, like they know something, they cut a little rectangle and they tuck it under so that you can use it later. I just make a little circle and peel it off, and then you can see through here.
And they actually squeeze through the plastic and everything?
Yeah, because bees are, when they want a resource, they just puff it up. That's also why you don't put anything directly on this. So for example, so I'm glad you brought that up. If you set this on your inner cover and put an outer cover directly over it, you're compressing it. I recommend you install spacers to keep it off from directly pushing down on the fondant pack, because then it does defeat the bees' opportunity to get up in there and get all the resources.
So in essence, you have a telescopic insulated cover, and so you're not really using an inner cover anymore.
This insulated inner cover replaces your standard inner cover. Yeah.
Why can't you just put it right on top of the bees?
You could.
You can,
Okay.
in fact, but on the bee frames.
Right.
Not the bees.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can put it, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's another part of it. If I put this right on the frames of bees, because it's going to do best directly over the cluster, how do I check it? So here it comes, we're mid-December, and I want to know what the status is. If I pull the outer cover off, now I also have to pull the inner cover off, even to look to see what that consumption rate is. So now, let's say it's still good, but now I've exposed and lost all the heat that we've stored in there. And by the way, the recovery time for defeating that heat capsule that we call it can be 8 or 10 hours. And we do that because we have thermals and humidity sensors in there. So if we could just take the outer cover off and see what's going on, and you've brought a replacement with you, so you pull it off, now we have a hole this big, we put a new fondant pack right on. And in the meantime, this plastic prevents airflow from escape while we're looking at that. But yeah, you can put them straight on.
Question about your foam inner covers and outer covers. Do you have trouble with the ants tunneling in them? Or does
Ants?
it-
No, I haven't.
But you paint them?
If it's the polystyrene outer cover, yeah, see, I've left them on painted and unpainted because I want to see what their degradation rate is. But yeah, you paint the outside of this with household latex exterior paint. But I've not had ants go up in there. And if they did, let's say ants around here, I've heard terrible ant stories from around the world, but their ant species are much different than ours. But usually ants, when they get up the side of a hive and get in there, they kind of confine themselves to the inner cover area. They're getting away with the heat and protection of the hive. So they generally don't interact with your bees very much.
A few years ago, someone here in the association offered, I can't remember, maybe the person is here, I don't remember who it was, but kind of construction foam that was available very reasonably priced.
And a hard plastic shell on the outside.
And
Yeah.
Ross built some hives with it, and they were ants just tunnel all through.
Ants are opportunistic, they're seeking shelter, just like everything else, but when it's been just the insulated cover like this, I've not had ants. But I can imagine if you had an envelope like this would provide, this stays as a cap on the top, but if it extended down the full length, I would expect to see lots of things hiding under that between the outer wall and the
Yeah.
hive. Yes?
Just to piggyback off that question, I've never really even seen the styrofoam lids before, and I'm wondering, and maybe there's a reason for this, because I always thought it's ridiculous that there's this piece of flashing over the top of it. It just doesn't make sense because it just wears the bees down in the hottest days of the year. So I'm wondering, and thinking about maybe it's time to make some of those and switching them out seasonally and only using those in the summer to really get rid of that, that reflective where the heat.
Right, but why not use it summer and winter?
But that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
So do you think that, in your experience, how long have those lasted? Have you had any degradation or, obviously you haven't had the ants,
My unpainted ones, they feel porous and soft on the outside, and they've been on for 10 years. And they're still working. And the ones that are painted just look better. So
Even the wooden ones will wear out over time.
they yellow, but I recommend painting them. Annette's mad because she painted this yellow, and then I came by and made it green. So
So how do you glue that together? What do you use
for the
styrofoam?
Okay, it's interesting that you say that because the best glue for attaching that polystyrene together is actually expansion foam. So people that do foam sculpture, these super nerdy people that make these little like water fountains and things like that, like I made for our daughter and son-in-law at their wedding, I made this giant fountain and everything all out of the sculpted stuff. Expansion foam is the best way, so you run a little bead of great stuff, then you stick them together, and it compresses out, and we know that great stuff expands and fills all the gaps and irregularities, so we might cut that, and it actually becomes as strong as the material that you're bonding. So, for me,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
With no damage to the bees, they have no interest in that.
No, because keep in mind, this is not in contact with your bees.
Right, right.
Now, it's good that you brought that up because the Pink Panther foam and stuff like that does off-gas. And that is the difference between polystyrene does not. So some of the home insulation stuff that you see, the blue and the pink board, off-gases. Therefore, it should be on the outside of your hive and not exposed directly to your bees.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
that's good to know.
Any other?
Fred, what's all the little,
Have you tested that fondant?
He's asking about the bees. What?
Have you tested that fondant?
Yeah, last year.
Yeah?
And every hive that I had that on did better. The populations were better. And for those of you who don't know, I also do Nozema counts. So I don't know if you understand how to do that. You have to kill bees or not. Because what you can do is, people get mad if you kill the bee as a beekeeper. So I have these clean out tools where I scrape out dead bees in the bottom of the boards in wintertime, whenever there's a snowstorm and so on. You can scrape out your dead bees. Those dead bees are a great opportunity to remove their abdomens, crush them up in a baggie, use fresh water, draw that water out, put it on a microscope slide, and look for Nozema spores. And if you've got a 50x magnification capability, you can see the spores. They have little light halos around them. And there's also a hemo, I forget the total name for the slide, maybe one of our hemo something slide, they're designed for counting blood cells and stuff.
Hemocytometer.
What is it?
A hemocytometer.
Does that make sense? Is that the name of the slide?
Yeah, it's a glass slide.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it's a hemocytometer. I was about to say that. Anyway, yeah, it's already metered, so when you drip it on there, and then of course it's just a segment of that where you do spore counts and you get an idea of the load. So those with hive alive in them have about 20% of what those who are untreated would have. Now that doesn't mean that the Nozema spores will kill your bees. What it does mean is they have a limited life length, that their productivity in the hive is reduced, and that their ability to process resources in your hive is also profoundly reduced because you've got a living organism in the bee's midgut that is competing with the bee for those resources.
Is that because of the spirulina in it? The effect of that, or?
Spirulina actually also helps the bees. So Nozema, spirulina in what?
In the Hive Alive.
I don't think spirulina is in that. I've done spirulina studies separate from that, but in here, for those of you who want to stick around after and see what the ingredients are, they're on the pack, but spirulina is not part of that. I've done spirulina as well, which was supposed to benefit the bees. Very difficult to see a difference from mine.
So moving on here, our other expert, Charlie, comments, questions?
No, I haven't started button mine up. I think Mark's got it. Mark,
you want to come up?
I set up quote boxes.
I've transitioned over many years from the standard, what they teach in standard classes in the books, and so I've transitioned a lot. My most successful was some sort of moisture bag. You have a screen now.
Yeah, but I know Charlie uses burlap bags. He puts the wood chips, pine chips, right, or cedar chips.
So I'm just really, my system is really, so I take the covers off, I leave an excluder there, put an empty box or a shim over. And then I'll feed, if I don't feed, I put a moisture bag. Generally, it's a burlap bag with wood shavings. I'll put that directly over there. That has worked good for me. Not necessarily need to ventilate it anywhere else, but they still. But if I want to feed it, I can take that moisture bag off, and put feed on it. Generally, I'll use a medium box because it's deeper and I have more room. And then I'll put the moisture bag back over the feed. That's worked for me. So these are also interesting. I have, more recent years, I've experimented with this condensation where there's no top ventilation. And I broke the rules. I used a stiff board, even as 3/4 or a 1/2 inch styrofoam. But even that's better than ventilated. If the hive's got enough honey in it, they're going to survive the winter. But they like to trap some air in the top. You always find bees up in the top, especially this over years of experience. The one year that I was losing all my bees, and then this guy's getting out of business, and he says, well, he was selling bees, and he says, go ahead, go look at them. This is in February. I went into his yard, and he had just sheets of plywood on every hive. I thought, well, they're not ventilated. He's breaking all the rules. They're not ventilated. Every one of those hives was alive. They crack, you crack the top, and then all the bees are at the top. They can cross over to the top bars, go anywhere they want, but they've got that trap of air in the top. So that was my first clue that maybe the books aren't right. So I've been experimenting more and more and cutting off more ventilation because that dew point, cold air meeting hot air, it's just like a styrofoam cup. Plus, I have polystyrene nukes. I can winter polystyrene, and they're a 6-frame nuke, and I've had tremendous success. There's no top ventilation. It just worked. I can't do that with wood. Wood will frost on the inside. I can't remove that. Anyway, just a business.
But what I expand on is instead of making, 3 or 4 different things to put on the hive, I just use a medium box. If I wanted to, I can make this into a honey super. It's grooved. I can set my frames right in there. But what I do is also use this as my spacer because I need space underneath here. This would go on top of my my inner cover, and I can put my food, and there's enough room here for a wrap around underneath this. And then what I do, instead of going with the burlap bags or something, I just dump all my chips in on the top. That's why there's the screen in here. So I can use this multiple ways. When it comes springtime, if I'm all done, if I do need more supers, then I just pop the nails out of the screens and just pull it out and set them right back on with frames in it. And but like I say, this goes on top of my inner cover, because then I make my own, so it's got a single round hole that I can open up in here. I found that even, I don't know why, because I put screen on there, because I didn't want them to go back and forth. Almost all my bees propolis that screen, so I have to pop it off of there and get rid of it, because they didn't want the ventilation to begin with. So that's what I brought this, if anybody wants to look. It's triple use. It's got this, you got space underneath, you got room for your chips, and then I can take the inside out and use it for soup.